passage.
But that's the whole arc of any storyteller.
Yeah.
And it's the hero journey again, isn't it? The hero's journey is going out on a quest, leaving what you know and the comfort.
Hello, beautiful people. Goodness, I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. I've just finished recording a conversation podcast with Claire Gillman. She is an author of this wonderful book, Learning to Love the Spaces in Between. The book explores liminality and what it's like to be in those transitional moments of our life. So as you know, Claire is an author. I believe she's written around 30 books. Can you believe it or not? She's also the old editor of the Wellbeing and Spiritual magazine called Kindred Spirit. If you've not read that, I suggest you go find that too. It's really, really exciting. This conversation, we explore so many things from consciousness. We talk about out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, dreams, rites of passage. Oh, it's juicy. I hope it's totally tantalizing for you. I hope you enjoy every single moment of it. So here we go. This is episode 4 of the YBL podcast. Enjoy. Hello, Claire. Welcome to the YBL podcast.
No, thank you very much, Joshua, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
It's really lovely to have you here. I've been really, really excited since we had that conversation about arranging it. I think it's been
that was a while
3 months ago, 3 months ago.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Yeah, really nice to have you here. I mean, I think it'd be a really good way to get going if we just go straight into this beautiful book that you've written, because that will sort of provide some context for the conversation.
Yeah.
And then we can start talking about that, because the themes are stuff that I explore quite a lot in the tarot card readings, but you offer such a beautiful, the way you explain it is like so palatable and accessible. So I think people will really appreciate.
That's interesting because I think with the book, I mean, even trying to come up with a title, it's quite a hard concept to get across.
Yeah.
It's such a nebulous subject.
Yes.
That just trying to pin it down to one title was incredibly hard, actually.
Well, I can imagine, because the theme is ineffable. It goes
absolutely.
on and on and on and on.
It does.
So shall we just
let's
name drop this beautiful creation that you've made?
Thank you.
Would you like to say it, or shall I say?
No, you go back.
So this is Claire Gillman. As you all have heard from the thumbnail of this podcast, but it's called Learning to Love the Spaces in Between. Discover the Power of the Liminal Spaces.
Right, and it's liminal spaces. That is one of those phrases that when you say to people, when they say, "What are you writing on?" I say, "I'm writing about liminal space," and they go, "Ooh, that sounds interesting. I feel very drawn to that." And then they say, "What is it?"
Yeah. That's going to be my first question. What is the liminal space?
It's such a hard thing to sum up in one kind of little nutshell. But liminal space is it can be physical or metaphysical.
Right.
So the limen is the boundary. Limen is the threshold. And so liminality is when you've stepped over that threshold and you're into a space where you're no longer in the familiar.
Right.
When you're into something new, but you haven't necessarily reached where you're going. You haven't reached that destination yet. And that can be tangible. It can be geographical, like wild places, thin places, coastlines where you're between the land and the sea.
Yeah.
And of course, it can be metaphysical, so consciousness between wake and sleep, that hypnagogic state. That's it. When you're, so if you're having an out-of-body experience.
Yes.
All of these things, and I know you're interested in all.
I'm so interested in it. I'm so interested. It's on my face. Ooh.
So when you're in those states, but even even in consciousness itself, if you're in an state of altered consciousness, whether that's induced or whether that's through meditation or whatever it is, that is a liminal space.
Okay.
And often with liminal spaces, whether it's geographic or otherwise, there is a sense of awe. There is a sense of being in touch with something that is greater than ourselves. But alongside that, being in the unknown, being in something that you're not familiar with, not comfortable with, despite all the wonderful opportunities it offers us, it's very much something that if we find discombobulating, we find uncomfortable, isn't it? It's something where we like homeostasis. That's the thing. We don't like change.
Terrifying change. Yeah.
And so, people who are going through some sort of transformation and they're not comfortable with it, and they don't really know where it's going to end up, they're in liminal space.
Okay. So these are huge themes.
Yeah.
And just to play the role of inquisitor, because I want to make sure I understand it completely, because if I'm not understanding it, maybe they're not understanding it. So I just want to make sure that this is right. So a physical form of liminal space could be literally, as you said, the transition between the sand and the grass when we're on the cliffside. That's going from inside to outside. Yep. But when we're in the corridors, those
in between spaces, like car parks between the outside and the building.
So an airport,
right? Yeah, you're in transit. It's that movement between you're on your journey, but you've not arrived at your destination, but you've left what you know behind.
Yes. Okay. A car. All of this stuff. Okay. And then metaphysical. Can we unpack that term a little bit, just to sort of maybe that's another rabbit hole, but I'll let you answer it before I go into
so the metaphysical is the spiritual world. It's the ephemeral. It's anything I know very well that that there's so much stuff that we cannot explain, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And that's liminal.
And then I'm thinking of the stacked liminal spaces where we are in a period of maybe emotional change. Say, for example, a partner's left and we're bereft and heartbroken, but we're also driving in a car. so is that the two realms of meeting? Does that make sense?
Yes, but one tends to then take primacy in that situation, because you are traveling, but very often it's the emotional situation is kind of dominant, because that's what's in your mind at the moment, and that's the thing that is absorbing you and totally. So the fact that you happen to be journeying as well is kind of less important. But there are places like when you're on a pilgrimage, for example. Then you're in that space of having left what you know. You're discovering stuff about yourself on the journey. You haven't reached your site of pilgrimage. You haven't reached where you're going to. So that is the metaphysical combined with the physical, because very often on those journeys you're in thin places or wild spaces that are also liminal spaces, because they lie between a city and another city or whatever.
Okay. I mean, it's really fascinating.
It is fascinating. And the thing is, having read the book, I started this when the book started, feeling so drawn to liminality and liminal space, but not really knowing why. And often when you write a book, and I have written quite a lot, you put yourself in the position of the authority. You're writing on something to share with people, to share. This process of writing this book was so different because I didn't feel like this could be a didactic text, because what I needed was an understanding of it, or as much as an understanding as you can get of something that's so intangible. And so every chapter that's in there, I talk to other people who are knowledgeable within that specific area of liminality, because you keep going down rabbit holes. And so the book itself is my exploration of these things. So I never really set myself up as an expert on it. But what I can tell you is my experiences of exploring this and the benefits I have got from doing that.
Yeah.
And I feel, well, one thing I feel very clearly from the end of that experience and that writing experience is that there's so much within this exploration that we can all benefit from if we're prepared to put ourselves into those spaces.
Enter into it. And that reminds me of like, well, I've got two questions here, so I want to put a pin in this, because when we set the intention of going on a pilgrimage, we're making action to put ourselves into that liminal space. So there's an expectation. So I have a question around why we are, or one would traditionally be afraid of that change, why we're so resistant to being, in the tarot, that would be the Tower card. We're forced into something happens and we're forced into the unknown. So why do we have such resistance for that change? And then the second question, which is probably a whole nother thing, is it feels like your process for writing this book was a real journey of you navigating that liminal space. This whole YouTube channel is around sort of self-actualization and making that accessible for people, to show us that it's not this big, but it can be a scary thing, but leaning into that. So it feels like it brought you a lot of healing, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I think trying to touch on both of those things. As I've said before, we become comfortable with what we know. So very few of us will willingly invite chaos and change into our lives. We prefer that homeostasis, what we know. And even sometimes when we know it's not great for ourselves, or we know that we're not in a fantastic place, but we know it. We know where we are. But in that safe space, this is a sweeping generalization, but in that safe space, very often, that's not a space where you tend to find your creativity. It's not where you tend to find your self-knowledge. It's not where you tend to take the chance on learning stuff that you may not want to know. You have to have that leap of faith to do that. So often, when people find themselves in the liminal space, it's because something has been forced upon them. Change has been forced upon them. Maybe a breakup they weren't expecting. Maybe a redundancy, all those things. And that puts you into a very, what we consider an uncomfortable place, because we don't know what opportunities lie within it. We're not looking for the opportunities, we're just looking at the scary bit. So a lot of people will have a much better grasp on what liminal space is post the COVID pandemic. Because before that, some people had not invited change into their lives and had played it safe. And so they didn't really get that little window into what it could mean. So a lot of people, when the pandemic came, when COVID struck, their lives were going along. They thought they had their lives planned out. They thought they had the next steps planned out. And then suddenly it hit, and it hit globally, and everybody's life was up in the air. The liminal part of that was, we found ourselves in this space, but we didn't know what the future looked like. We didn't know what post-pandemic was going to be like for any one of us. And for most people, many people, that was really uncomfortable. But for some people, they lent into that. They suddenly thought, well, okay, I wouldn't have chosen this, but let me reassess. Or let me do something to fill my time. And they've discovered something more about themselves. And that time for reflection is something we don't give ourselves in the modern world.
We do not have time for it. I was talking to somebody the other day about how even I can remember growing up even, and maybe I grew up in a smaller village, but nowhere was open on a Sunday. So the whole sort of England just agreed that Sunday was a day to rest, be with the family, connect with something more sacred, slow down. But I know I'm in central London right now. Everywhere's open, nowhere's closed on a Sunday. And if it was, I'd be outraged
because you couldn't get what you wanted.
I can't get my coffee instantly.
Yeah, and that's that wanting, because we've got so used to having instant gratification.
Yes.
We don't wait for results. We don't wait for the slow reveal.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's when you find out more. That's when you learn more. If you can just sit with that discomfort and just be in that space,
right,
and start to think a little more about, stop all that busyness.
Yeah.
Being. I mean, none of this is new, is it? It's all the teachings. It's all the wisdom teachings have told us about this stuff.
Yeah.
But for so many people, that pandemic experience was the first time that was forced on them. And I know there were terrible things that happened.
Yeah.
And people lost people, and it was awful. But there were opportunities within it as well.
Yeah. I've definitely had that reflection. I've seen there sort of be different groups of people. Some people, it was difficult to sort of lean into that, maybe because of responsibilities like family or children or parents or something. Some people just seem to have a complete meltdown, and some people went, I've got all this free time. I've always wanted to. No, banana bread became a thing, didn't it? And like everyone became banana bread experts. And I certainly found myself like a lot of trauma was activated in me because of an external circumstance, and I was so grateful for that space that I was allowed to actually have time to sit and grieve and feel that in a way where I wasn't forced to be serving someone over a counter and pretending everything was all right. And then that led me to deepening my relationship with self and learning tools to understanding more about how my mind works, and therefore be able to speak. So it served a purpose. But yeah, it definitely, I was quite lucky in that sense, and that language has already been in my family, so I could.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
It makes such a big difference. But
because for many people, what they experienced was the same as you and I, but we had a vocabulary we call on to interpret it for ourselves. But people who've not necessarily been exposed to those teachings or that way of life, then it's just like, what the hell is going on? What is happening? What is happening to me? And that's quite a strange thing, isn't it? And you asked about the book being a strange liminal space for me. And this was during when this book first came together, when the book first started, the concept for it. It was not this book. Okay. It was a concept about liminal space, and it was pre-COVID. Yeah. And I was going, with the publisher, with Joe Loud, who was brilliant. We were going to do this book. And then the pandemic hit, and it kind of evolved. And I started the book along the lines that we've originally discussed. And as I've alluded before, I've written a lot of books. So I knew how to write a book, if you like. And then I started to write this and realized I was going down all these different rabbit holes. And the more I went into the whole subject of the liminal space and allowing and being lost before you could be found, the more I thought, I can't do this. This book is not going to work as it was originally conceived. And I got into that blind panic of what's it gonna, I can't, this is awful, this is alien to me. This is not the writing process I'm used to. And through that, being slightly lost and afraid, the idea of making this more of a documentary of my exploration came about. And I went back to Joe at Welbeck and said, I don't think I can write the book we originally discussed, but this is how I could see it working. And she was like, that's great. And that's how it came about. But it was the most difficult, the most painful book writing process I've been through in 30 odd years of writing books. I can imagine. It was very strange. Yeah, the image, not to downplay this process, but like I got the image of like, it's the most amazing soup full of all these different ingredients, and you're chopping various different
vegetables. I don't know. That's just like
because it touches on so many different aspects of liminality.
Yeah.
And I talked to so many amazing experts within their field who were so passionate about what they did. And they were saying, oh, you need to read this and you need to speak to them. And have you read or have you seen? And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm just scraping the surface on every little bit of this book. There's a book in every chapter almost. But then it had to be my experience of this and their wisdom.
Yeah.
And going into it, what I then got out of knowing more about that, and did I feel drawn to spend more time in that space or not?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've done a really good job
reading
through it. I love the way that you have laid it out, and I love what the bit that I look forward to in each chapter is your takeaways.
My takeaways.
Yeah, your takeaways at the end of each bit.
They were last minute.
Yeah, they're really nice.
I was thinking, I was going to do a kind of recap of the chapter.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, they've just read it. Why don't I give them my take, what it meant to me and some of my practices.
Yeah.
How I make that tangible and real in my life.
Yeah.
Because of this, this nebulous intangibility of it all.
Yeah.
So how do I bring that into my life?
How do you bring it into your life? I'm wondering for somebody right now who is in that realm of liminality.
Well, I suppose if you, for example, if you take the chapter, which just seemed like the obvious starting point for me, because it's something perhaps, especially post-COVID, that we could identify with, is when there's transformation and change in your life that you haven't welcomed into your life.
Yes.
When you're thrust into that situation. Yeah. And how you navigate it. And I interviewed people for that. And one of the ladies, Abigail Bergstrom, who I interviewed, had willingly, which is very, very unusual, put herself into the situation of giving up her own flat, giving up her job, giving up. So all of those markers in the sand that we use to define ourselves, she threw in the air and did it. Now,
brave.
It was very brave.
Yeah.
And there is jeopardy in doing that. It's not, I can't say do these things and it will all work out great for every time. That's the whole point of this. There is some jeopardy in doing this. But you don't have to go to those extremes. And there is a theory out there. There's a school of thought that says by slowly introducing areas in your life or bits within your life where you have less control. Then, so you're doing that consciously. Then when something out of your control happens, you are better able to adapt and navigate those choppy waters. So I feel that kind of resonates for me. Because if you always play it safe, you don't know what the universe is going to throw at you.
Yes.
And sometimes you're not well equipped to deal with it.
Your whole worldview is just so narrow.
Exactly.
There's a safety in it, but also for me, I can't help when I encounter people like that. Like, I don't know what part of me it is that wants to be like, take some risk. What are you going to meet? Come on, like, don't waste this beautiful opportunity of life for these various experiences and connections. And like, who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. And if you can foster that curiosity in you, if you can foster that, you find out so much about yourself, about the wider world. And we think, by playing it safe, to use that expression, it's safer. In a strange way, it's paradoxically, I don't think it is safer because you're not prepared. You have nothing to draw on when something is out of your control that you weren't expecting. Whereas those people who have slightly explored this a bit, those people who've taken some risks and it's paid off, they've discovered, then when those things happen, they're not so terrified. Because they've got that vague feeling in the back of their mind of, it will probably work out.
It feels like the liminal space is this, it's a threshold that allows us to let go of our own thresholds. Like, yeah, I have the sense of like, this is sort of my own experience, but so my star sign is Aries. I'm really fiery. I'm really impatient. I'm just like action, action. I don't think. And so the mantra of my like New Year's resolution, or a year later, was patience, Aries. So I always tell myself. So I've really been working on this notion of trusting, surrendering, letting things fall into place. And I identified that where I was not letting things fall into place is to do with my own fear and sense of self-lack. So actually, the liminal that's come up for me has been around finding safety, a new layer of safety in my own skin in certain experiences, which has been really healing and powerful. I'm not by no means mastered that just yet. What I have noticed is the experiences that I've started to manifest into my life because of moving myself through some difficult experiences and learning to let go and allow things to fall into place as they need to. Whatever those blinders are, or that blockade or that wall within my psyche, that's started to dissolve, and a freedom of being has started to emerge, which is immensely satisfying.
Yeah. This is fascinating, isn't it? How you can't see your own potential sometimes from that.
Yeah.
Unless you give yourself the permission to make some mistakes and to go and to do stuff, and to stop trying to control not just your own responses but other people's.
Yeah.
And as a mother, I think that's, I lost my mother in COVID, so that makes me now the matriarch of the family, and which is a strange role.
Yeah.
But so I find one of my things there is that I try to fix everything so everyone's comfortable, and you can't necessarily do that. You've got to let people do their own, be responsible for their own relationships within that large group.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you're sat with that task of watching. How many children do you have?
I have two children, but I'm talking about the bigger family, and there's you just got to let everyone.
Multiple liminal spaces all happening.
Yeah. I think it was something which was really interesting about that. I was thinking about the children, and it made me jump to a chapter in there on rites of passage, because within rites of passage they talk about it, and moving from childhood into parenthood, into adulthood.
Yeah,
that's the very obvious rite of passage, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there's also a rite of passage for parents in terms of taking their hands off the wheel of it and letting them, obviously being there to help nurture and in any way they can, but not to control anyone. That's a really big one.
Yeah.
But those rites of passage are really interesting. That stuff that Michael Boyle talks about in there, about you have to be taken when they do this manhood stuff work. You have to take people out of what they're familiar with. You have to take them. There has to be a level playing field. You have to put people into a liminal space before they can move into what's possible for them.
Yeah.
Before they can find out those things about themselves. Otherwise, you continue to play the role that you've always been playing.
Right. So just to clarify, because I'm quite passionate about the notion of rites of passage. I explored quite a lot of it in my dissertation.
You can tell me about this.
No, because I'm here. I want to hear your thoughts, and I'm really practicing this. No,
you dive in.
No, but what I want to just explore before we unpack this beautiful subject is just to explain a little bit about the notion of a rite of passage and what that is, just for anybody in case they don't know specifically.
Well, it can be any time or stage of your life, but the most obvious ones are in traditional societies where boys become men, girls become women. That's the most obvious rite of passage. But even within, if you go on a vision quest or something, that is also a kind of rite of passage where you are then taken away from what you do for your self-development, you have that experience and you come back and you share it with everyone.
Yes.
And you're something different from when you started it.
Yeah. So it's like a transformational
It's a transformational journey.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to do rites of passage work in modern society with a group of people, if you work within a room and then they go home to what they're used to, and then they come back and work within a room, that you're probably going to struggle to get that rite of passage experience, because they're still living the life.
Yeah.
They're still being the person that they were at the beginning.
Yeah.
And they're dipping their toes into rites of passage work.
Try that.
Actually go back and I'll be whoever I was before.
Yeah.
So with modern day rites of passage work, I don't know why I'm telling you all this, because you know all this.
You're not telling me, you're sharing with these guys. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the liminal stuff there is that the group would come together. They would be put into a scenario and a situation that they're not familiar with and not comfortable with. So then it's a level playing field, but all, you can be whatever you want to be. And you're supported in this, of course, because you learn things about yourself and your potential in those scenarios. And then there's a celebration of it. Most rites of passage is about a celebration of moving from that position to the next.
It's such a,
and it's powerful.
So powerful, isn't it? And what I love about the notion of the rites of passage, and some of the younger people might hate me for saying this, but the respect of the elder. There'd be an elder that guides you through this journey. They've walked that path before. They show you that suffering is a universal thing. We all suffer. And I'm struggling because I'm in that. I guess I'm in the liminal space between being. I'm 30, maybe 33. I'm not old. I'm not young. I don't know what I am right now. But like middle age. But there's this sort of I'm liminal. There's just this like there feels to be this disrespect for elders. Disrespect, like the way that we treat. Even let's go right to the elderly. We just put them away. Don't deal with them, and they become a nuisance. And then like we look at society, and there's just so much critique of some infrastructure that has been sort of established to create like what one might call control, but I call that order. And then within the order, we have the freedom for chaos to explore and be our own beautiful chaotic selves. Exactly. In order to be in the liminal, we have to have some order, otherwise. And so I'm really struggling and going through this process at the moment of seeing like a lot of young people just like screaming, calling the shots. Like there's like I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, what is happening? Like there's a lot of knowledge in some of the stuff we're sharing, like it's opening up the worlds of compassion and different views, but it can't all be correct knowledge if you're dismantling people that have lived. And
I actually feel that we have been there. We've been in that state for quite a while, I would say. I think we're having a slight move away.
Okay. Yeah.
I was thinking, when I used to edit Kindred Spirit, for a long time, you couldn't talk about the role of the crone. You couldn't talk about, the wisdom of older people. Because no one wants to be called a crone.
Yeah, that's a hard archetype, isn't it?
Archetype. But in recent years, very recent, I would say there's this move towards accepting that that's an important role in society.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes only a long life and experience can teach you some stuff that could help everybody.
Yeah.
And I think you realize, my husband's just retired, and he was saying, it seems I've got I've got a lifetime of experience within his chosen career. What a waste if I don't pass that on. We old guys know stuff.
Yeah.
And we should be passing that on. And it's not just in the workplace, it's in the living life space. Yeah. And I don't think I don't think for 1 minute, I wouldn't have the arrogance to say that people don't have to learn themselves through experience. Of course, we all do. But that doesn't mean that you can't listen to the wisdom of the elders.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. I think
and I do think there's a slight, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah, there's a shift.
I'm hopeful there's a slight shift coming.
Yeah,
and that and I don't think it's just the young people themselves. I think we've had that period where people have been chasing eternal youth.
Yeah.
They didn't want to identify as the wisdom holders, as the crones, as the elders.
Yeah.
If they're shunning it, why would the kids want to look to you for advice?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess also it's like, economically it's very difficult for the young people, so there's a lot of anger, and so there has to be some form of meeting ground. But that sort of respect for the elder is, I think, something that will create a bit more of an alignment. So if that keeps coming, because there's what's he called? There's a psychologist called Erickson. And this is, I'm going back to my training, and he talks about the stages of life in order to feel satisfied at what age you're at. And like when you're in your sort of later years, it's to feel like you're living a meaningful existence is to be the sharer of wisdom.
Yeah.
And those that can't share their wisdom apparently feel like they are not living to their full potential in that particular demographic of people. So I don't know why this plight has emerged in me, but I think it might be the frustration of the rage that I find myself sort of being the conduit of. Yeah. So
yeah, I think the thing is, it's like young people are rightfully angry about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And they should, when you're young, you should have that fire in your belly. And you should be angry about social injustice and things like that. But they're angry about the hand they've been dealt as well on occasion.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they think older people won't understand.
Yeah.
But they do, because they have had injustice.
Yeah.
It might not be the same. They might, you might be going, oh, but you smug lot, you've got your own houses.
Yeah.
Okay, but there are other things that they had in their youth that felt hugely unfair to them when they were that age. So it's not like they can't identify on one level with that anger if you give them a chance.
Yeah.
But also, it behoves the older people to express that.
Right. Yeah.
Not to sit on their high horses.
I think, and I've been privy to this as well. There's been a fear around speaking against that, or a fear against sort of saying, shut the F up. And we're starting to see that a little bit coming back as well. I think there's been a sort of bullyish energy that's been, this is just what I'm seeing. I speak for myself here. But being afraid to speak through fear of being cancelled, being afraid to open up a conversation that might be difficult for fear of saying the wrong thing in case you got upset or misunderstand. Like that feels like such a tumultuous landscape.
It's not a healthy landscape.
It's not a healthy landscape.
Because it means nobody can truly say what they want to say for fear of offending, which they don't want to do. And so, that's very difficult. It's very interesting. And again, that's sort of been my journey, because I realize I'm doing a lot of self-indulgence on this conversation, but like it's here. So I used to find myself with that same anger. I used to find myself, for example, really angry with people that had a lot of money, and then I'd be this social justice warrior screaming on Facebook about, well, the global elites have all the power, blah blah blah. And then when I actually got real with myself and I asked myself, why am I angry about this? It was because I was jealous that I'd been dealt a hand where that wasn't there. And then I was like, okay, so this is jealousy. What can I do about that? Okay, maybe I could take rather than expecting somebody to come and fix my problems, I could actually take some responsibility and become excited about becoming successful. And therefore my inner energy shifted. And now that path of like completing that and that healing around like a poverty consciousness
just became my responsibility rather than everybody else's. And
it is taking action as well. You took action. Because we sit back and bemoan our situation whilst not taking action.
I used to love being the victim so much. So much.
You're not alone in that.
I should love it. Oh, this happened to me. It was so bad. Let me tell you about this, So the liminal space, I think, has actually been thrown at me quite a lot. There's been so many moments where I feel like the universe has really pushed that through. And as I say, I've been fortunate to sort of have that spiritual language around, but when people don't have that, so how do we sort of get people?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because if you Steve Taylor, psychologist Steve Taylor, he's done a lot of work about spontaneous spiritual awakening.
Yeah,
and for people who have those spontaneous spiritual awakenings, it's a scary experience, and they are, of course, in the liminal.
Yeah,
they're in this. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know what's going on. It's terrifying. And he says that for those who got some sort of exposure to a spiritual language, a spiritual openness, then that's so much easier for them to navigate this spontaneous awakening.
Right.
Because they've got some sort of yardstick. They've also got some way of explaining, however roughly, what's happening to them. Whereas if you've never spoken to anyone about whether your views on what lies beyond or personal development or any of those things, and this is all alien to you, then there's a sort of a shame around this spiritual awakening because I can't talk about this. Yeah. This is hokum pokum.
Yeah.
This no one I know is going to believe this or understand this. It's all woo-woo. Yeah. Whereas if you have, my sons, when they were younger, used to call it mum's hippie shit. Oh, mum, it's mum's hippie shit.
Yeah.
Whereas now they're very happy to explore things in their own way, and I've not pushed them towards that. But if you've had somebody in your life who talks around these areas and talks about the esoteric, and you have these metaphysical conversations, then you have a language that will help you explain what's happening to you and what you're feeling, and B, you might feel like you're less likely to be judged as bonkers.
Yeah. And then I can imagine beginning to explore that, speak out about that is really taking that risk to jump into whatever that is. Yeah. And that's such an interesting thing, isn't it? That in terms of spirituality, it seems to find people.
Yeah.
I don't think we find it. I guess that becomes a relationship with that. But there are these, spontaneous awakenings. And
for the most unlikely people.
For the most unlikely
people. The people who have probably been very skeptical, skeptical
Yeah.
about it. And it happens to them. And then that's hard for them to deal with.
Yeah. And I think this is a beautiful segue because I've been so excited to ask you about this because I've just read your chapter on near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. Yeah. And I can imagine that is the biggest spontaneous awakening for people that have that experience. Notion. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Of course we can. I love that. And again, that's a whole book in itself, isn't it? Really, there's so much in there. And what is consciousness?
What is consciousness?
What is consciousness? And that's something that we touch on, so that when you are in an altered state of consciousness, where are you? Where is consciousness seated?
Yeah.
And so, as you know, the received wisdom and the medical wisdom is that consciousness is sited in the brain.
Yeah, just like a little you sat in a chair, just pulling strings.
Yeah.
Puppet,
But for those people who have had near-death experiences and they have been clinically dead on the operating table or wherever that happens, they are able to report back about either going somewhere or seeing themselves in like an out-of-body experience and knowing what happened in that room and things that they couldn't possibly know.
Yeah.
And yet, if you are clinically dead and your brain is dead, and that's where consciousness is sighted, then how could you possibly have these experiences?
How could you know?
How could you know?
Yeah.
And there's no satisfactory answers to explain near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. Mm-hmm. And there's so much research in there.
Yeah.
And there's a fascinating guy in there called Dr. Avon Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's the second or the third. And he was a neuroscientist. And this is, he was of the allopathic medical world.
Right.
And he had a near-death experience. And he recovered from, no one thought he would recover from the brain trauma that he'd had. And he talks about his noetic experience, his understanding when he was in that place of a world of love, a different world from the one we're in, something greater than ourselves, and a non-duality. And then he has to come back to his colleagues and his life and try and explain what's happened to him.
And I can imagine that must be so depressing. You experience this like unconditional love in this other realm, and then you're back in this.
Yeah. But no, because it's interesting, because most people who have had near-death experiences, it always has an impact on them of some sort, and the vast majority, they find it some sort of comfort.
Okay.
Because they then know, and they can use the word know because they've been there, that there is something greater than ourselves, that there is a purpose, and that there is love. And many, many people, when you talk to Penny Sartori and people, and their research is that they go on to change how they live their life in this world because of what they experienced when they were in that liminal space between life and death.
Yeah, strange, isn't it? So our consciousness can leave the containment, the order of our body, can witness the three-dimensional world, yet also another plane. And remember when it comes back.
Yes. And I think the other thing that is fascinating about all of this is that if you think of consciousness as some sort of spectrum, if you like, we're only using this very small part of our consciousness at the moment, and there are those who have a more expanded consciousness through experimentation, through they might have they're what is the word I'm trying to find? They have different abilities. Yeah. Even psychics, if you want to put that on the spectrum as well, but that they are seeing more of that consciousness perhaps than the shaman, people who can touch into those things. And so, but it goes on, and we're only using this tiny part.
The molecule, really, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, then there's the dream space.
That's the dream space. That's a whole new. No, it's always been there, but it's a whole area of liminality.
Yeah.
That different cultures have. Some of us just see sleep as, I need it to get back to work tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole culture. You talk about the Aboriginal peoples in Australia, and their dream awareness is phenomenal. It's part of the fabric of society there.
Yeah, which makes sense because you sleep as much as you're awake. So, why can they not hold the same? Yeah, I love dream analysis.
I'm very drawn to. I don't know a lot about it, but you do, and I really find it fascinating.
It's amazing in the sense that sometimes when I'm feeling confused about a dilemma, or I want some form of guidance, I'll ask my guides, please give me a dream that explains this, and I'll sort of set the intention in the day, and then before I go to bed. And if I'm meant to have the answers, then I'll get that dream.
And when you interpret that dream, do you ever verify it with your tarot, or do you just trust it? Are they very separate things?
They do feel separate.
Work together? No, they're very
for me, they do. I'm sure some people might have another way of using it, but if I've had a particularly prolific dream, that will set the tone and my meditation for the whole day.
Right.
Because I'm like, oh, I had this. And then from like a Jungian stance, they're all symbols of the self. So whatever you dream of is just an expression, for the most part, of you. So even the people you dream of are symbolic. Their qualities is something you hold within yourself. I'm talking very simplistically here, but so if you dream of somebody that you don't like, chances are that's a part of yourself that you're not crazy about. Exactly. So it's all symbols that reflect self, and then that becomes the theme of exploration for the day. This is what this means. But where I get amazed is when it moves into the realm of prolific. So you might dream about something and then it happens, and then maybe you even forgot that you've had that dream, and then you have the sensation of deja vu, or something. And it's a prophetic phenomenal as well. Yeah. I mean, I think most people have experienced that to some degree.
Not everyone wants to admit that,
and not everyone wants to admit it, and therefore, like when you're talking about all this research around near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, I'm sure there's a lot of spiritual wisdom and knowledge that just knows adamantly that this is factual, but because we cannot hold it, we can't grasp it.
No,
we can't hold consciousness in our hand.
I know, but it's really interesting that the research into out of body. We live in a scientific age where science is king.
Yeah.
So now quantum physics and research in medical science is starting to prove what generations and generations of people have known, but couldn't show or prove. But it didn't make it any less valid back then. Just because there's something that can give you an explanation now. So it's that sort of trusting, isn't it? It's trusting.
It is trusting.
But that's the liminal.
And that's the liminal. And then we come back to the liminal.
We come back,
isn't it?
Trust is all about the liminal. And I think but although that there's a lot of discomfort there, whether your trust is about the spiritual, whether it's about taking a chance and it working out, whether it's doing something tangible, the trust, that liminal, is not always comfortable, but I think that there is so much opportunity that lies within it. And if you never ever go there, what are you missing out on? What is there? What is there that's possible for you?
That is a beautiful I think that's a really beautiful sentence to draw this down. It's got a beautiful weight, and I think a good place to leave people to reflect on.
There's lots to think on, isn't there?
Lots to think on. Certainly. It's learning to trust. I think that's what's my takeaway from this conversation, is that it is that
learning to trust. It's not easy.
No.
It's really not. And I think the other thing about that is that it's not constant either. Sometimes you waver and sometimes you're strong in it. And that's fine. Just because you've committed to this doesn't mean you've got to be constant in it.
All the way through.
All the way through.
Adamant energy.
Because that's our nature to question.
And if it was constant, would it not just be like so boring? I don't know.
Yes, certainty is alien to us. I'm always suspicious of people who are certain about everything.
I know everything. It's fine.
Sorry if you like that.
Sorry if you like that, guys. Yeah. It's interesting. I know I've just said believers, but like what the major arcani journey for me is now just which are the main players in the tarot are the story of liminality. Because it begins at the Fool, where we take the leap of faith into the unknown. And I won't go through them all now, but then we move into the High Priestess. No, we move into the Magician, which is about sort of becoming the manifester and trusting that we know. We'll know intuitively how to respond in each moment. And then the High Priestess is like when we're thrown into the underworld where we've got to use our intuition to converse. And so. And it just has this whole arc that guides us through this rite of passage.
But that's the whole arc of any storyteller.
Yeah.
And it's the hero journey again, isn't it? The hero's journey is going out on a quest, leaving what you know and the comfort, being challenged, facing something.
Yeah.
There being, an adversary.
Yes, from a challenge that we've got to overcome.
Overcome something you've got to overcome.
Of some sort.
And then returning to self, greater knowledge.
With a little bit more.
Yeah.
This is me.
Yeah.
Jump into that liminal space, guys. Come on.
Come on.
Do it. Yeah, it's exciting. It'll be worth it. It'll be really worth it. Oh, Claire, it's been such a pleasure having you on this podcast. Thank you so much.
It's been lovely chatting with you.
Really lovely. I could talk to you for hours about it, I'm sure. So
we'll be down those rabbit holes for hours.
Rabbit holes. Maybe we can put a little seed of a part 2 in there somewhere. So
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it.